Jim Edwards here for MMA Latest, and today we're talking about 10 fights that could happen at UFC 200 on July 9th. Don't forget to stick your suggestions in the comments below and tell me who you think could be fighting on the UFC's biggest show of all time. So let's start off with the main event in the evening. And of course it's going to be Conor McGregor defending his UFC featherweight title against one of two people. The options are Jose Aldo or Frankie Edgar. And personally, I think Frankie Edgar is the answer in more ways than one for the main event at UFC 200. Now, Jose Aldo was defeated by Conor McGregor back at UFC 194 in very conclusive circumstances after almost a year-long build-up. Frankie Edgar, in the meantime, has been getting wins over the likes of Ricardo Lamas, Cub Swanson, and most recently, Chad Mendes. And I think he finally deserves to get his shot at McGregor, and I think it's going to happen on July 9th. So in the co-main event of the evening, I think we're going to be seeing the return of Georges St-Pierre. Now, St-Pierre retired the title back in 2013, and since then, Robbie Lawler has been tearing up the division, beating the likes of Johnny Hendricks, Rory McDonald, and most recently Carlos Condit, and putting on performance of the night fights every single time. Now, St-Pierre, for the most part, has kept himself very distant from the UFC since he vacated the title. But we saw him for one of the first times in years when he was at the UFC 196 event just a few weeks ago. Since then, his coach, Faraz Sahabi, has also been tweeting out fantasy matchmaking with the likes of Diaz. But personally, I think he's only coming back for the title. So it only makes sense that him and Robbie Lawler will be your co-main event of the evening. The women's bantamweight title could also be on the line, and Miesha Tate could find herself opposite her old foe Ronda Rousey inside the octagon on July 9th. Now, we weren't expecting Ronda Rousey to be back until much later this year, but following Miesha Tate's win over Holloway at UFC 196, it seems she wants to come back an awful lot faster than planned. Now, let's not forget, these two have already fought twice already, and Ronda Rousey actually has 2 wins over Miesha Tate, last being back in 2013. But Miesha Tate since then has made several improvements in her game, and especially her use of footwork and her use of the space around the octagon could make this a much closer fight. I really hope we see this at UFC 200, and it could well be on the cards. Now, you're probably thinking I'm getting over ambitious here because I'm putting 4 title fights in this card. I've personally been told by the UFC this is going to be the biggest fight card of all time, so I have no qualms whatsoever of putting a UFC lightweight title fight on between Rafael dos Anjos and Nate Diaz. Now, of course, these two have already fought back in 2014, and it was a pretty conclusive result, with dos Anjos very convincingly beating Nate Diaz on the judges' scorecards. However, since then, we're seeing a much more motivated Nate Diaz. And boy, did this guy come to the party when he defeated Conor McGregor at UFC 196. I think the UFC owe him a favour, and I really think we could be seeing this fight at UFC 200. I'm also stacking the prelims high, because of course the UFC have got to convince the people watching for free on Fox Sports 1 that they need to tune into the pay-per-view later that evening. In the main event slot, we got a title eliminator. Max Holloway taking on Jose Aldo. Both these guys have a legitimate claim to be facing McGregor at UFC 200, but as I said earlier, I think that's going to Edgar. Before that, we're going to be seeing another title eliminator. Holly Holm versus Amanda Nunes. We'll also see TJ Dillashaw versus Thomas Almeida. Of course, I've got to have a few Brits on there, so we're going to go Joanne Calderwood versus Valerie Letourneau, Tom Breeze versus Sean Strickland, and there you go. Of course, you'd be saying I've only predicted 9 fights now, and that I have. I had originally predicted that Anderson Silva would face Tim Kennedy in the opening bout on the pay-per-view card, but since then, we've learned that Anderson Silva will likely face Uriah Hall at UFC 198. Hey, you can't win them all. Anyway guys, if you've liked the video, please give it a like rating, please subscribe to our channel, make sure you leave your suggestions and comments below. I've been Jim Edwards, I will see you later. SWF.